Welcome back to the Add a Zero Challenge live at Playground, where I try and take $10,000 and make it into $100,000 playing live cash games. Coming back with episode 7 here today, and it hasn't been the easiest start to the challenge. Certainly has not. The bankroll is $6,830. We're down a few buy-ins, all playing 2-5 cash games. But today is an interesting day. I think you're going to like today. Without further ado, let's get into the action. Starting up the session, looking down at 8-6 of diamonds. We call in the big blind for 35. We had a raise from seat 3, who is in the hijack in this spot. Go to the flop of king 8-6. We flop 2 pair. Great flop for us. And our opponent is going to bet $25. We raise it up to 90 here on this flop, thinking that our opponent is going to have a bunch of hands that can pay us off with value. So we make it 90. We've got about 250 in the middle. Turn is a 4. We bet 175, about 3/4 pot here on the 4. This is a really good card for us. It's not going to improve then. They don't have a hand like 5-7. And it's also kind of a blank. They're thinking that I don't improve often on that card unless I had 5-7, but it's not likely compared to all the hands I can have in this spot. So bet and a call, 175 with 250 on the flop. We've got about 600 in the middle, and the river is the queen of clubs. Now, this is not a great card. If I'm eyeballing my opponent's stack here, they have about $600 left, about a pot-sized bet. We have bottom 2 pair, but the queen of clubs rolls off, meaning that any ace-high club draw that floated the flop and picked up the club draw on the turn has now made a flush. And king-queen, a hand that is very much in their range, has now also made a flush. So what do I do with my 2 pair? There's value I can get against some other hands, I would think, in theory. But it's a very scary card, and we're going to get stacked sometimes when they have king, queen, and clubs. I decide to go for the all-in. Try and go for the thin value here. I think this is a mistake. Future Jamie thinks this is a mistake. And it's not just because we see what our opponent folds, but also because it's really hard to get value here. We're trying to get called from king-jack. We're trying to get called from ace-king. We're trying to get a hero call from, I don't know, ace-queen, right? Like, it's not an easy proposition to get called here unless our opponent is really rumbly, you know? Maybe they have king-9 in their opening range and we can get a call. Well, that's a different story. This opponent's playing pretty straightforward, and I think I've made too thin of a shove here on the river. I should rather check call or even check fold, depending on what I think about my opponent. Nonetheless, we go for the shove. My opponent tanks for a while and folds the ace-king face up. If our opponent folds ace-king on the river, clearly this is a terrible shove, right? This is the best hand that we're hoping to call. This is the hand right below ours. So if they're not calling this, it's a disastrous shove. We should never shove. Lesson learned. Our opponent can make some big folds on the river. And we're moving on. We pick up the pots, but in some ways, we're quite lucky here. I just want to add a quick note here about saying my hand. I see a lot of comments as well in the videos about why are you saying your hand. So the stream is on, like, beside the game on the TVs all the time. So people see my hands in 6 minutes. Most people are in the chat or watching the game on their phone. So I just save them some time. And actually, the most important thing in this game is that I'm sort of a guest to Playground, right? I've moved to Montreal recently. This is a new home for me, and I'm a new player in this room. What's important to me is that I am a positive environment for the players that play here every day. I would love to do this stream long term, and part of that is being accepted into the culture. So for me, I'm not actually thinking about how can I maximize my win rate. I'm thinking about how can I make the best environment for players that are playing in this game. And so saying my hand quickly helps me to sort of like ease people's worries, develop friendships fast, and not create sort of adversarial sort of setup. That may help my win rate, but that's, again, not the most important consideration right now, as I'm trying to build this game over the long run and this stream over the long run. Moving on.
Here we go.
Looking down at the beautiful aces in a double straddle pot, 2, 5, 10, 20.
65.
We're going to raise it up to 65. Now we get a call in the big blind. So we go to a flop. There's 130 in the middle. Seat 8, great guy. Was chatting with him. He's a good dude. This is, I think, the biggest game he's played at this point, so it's a bit of a shot for him. We bet into a pot of 130, and we get a quick call. This sort of board is good, right, with our aces, but the question I have to ask myself is, how are we going to get value from a lot of worse hands over multiple streets? And I don't think the way to do it is really big bomb bets, because our opponent is going to have trip 4s occasionally, and then usually a bunch of weak hands. They just called pre-flop, you know, so we can get calls from 5s and 6s and 7s and 8s, but we actually want to keep their range wide by betting small.
100. 225.
So small bet on the flop, small bet on the turn, and on the river, I go for a thin value bet of 225. Again, thinking we have the best hand, but it's hard to get called by worse hands. We show the aces, we take it down against what I'm assuming is a middling pair. I'm assuming is a 5s, a 6s, a 7s, and 8s, something like that, that called down all the way. But maybe a hero call, you never know. King 8 suited, we raise it up to 35 in a straddle pot. This is a borderline raise, but we decide to go for it, and we go 3 ways to the flop.
I think you're out of line.
Flop is deuce, 3, 8. Checks to us, and we bet 30 into a pot of about 110. This is a very small bet, but this is a normal sizing in multi-way pots. We just want to deny some equity, you know, get the jack queens of the world to fold, and allow some ace highs to continue, get some value from those hands, etc. Now we get raised to 80 here, and this hand gets super funky from this point on. This is a crazy hand, right? C5 raises it up to 80, and we've got to think about what is their range pre-flop. That's the thing here. Alarm bells with our king 8 is going off in that I don't think this is a very good hand. When we think about what calls in the big blind, well, they're going to have a hand like ace 8, potentially, right? They're going to have a hand like 9s, like 10s. Maybe jacks sometimes decide to call instead of 3-bet. So we can give them those hands, ace 8, 9s, 10s, jacks. And we can give them maybe sets of 2s and 3s, probably. And maybe sets of 8s, although there's only one combo of 8s. So those are the sort of hands that make sense, that are value hands that might raise here, right? Go for the check raise, get some value against my small bet in a 3-way pot. In theory, in this situation, actually, the small blind doesn't do any raising, but we don't have to touch on that. You just get the point. Trust me on that. But in practice, they do go for the raise, and that's sort of the range we're looking at. The problem in this spot is that we raise an early position. We also have 2s and 3s and 8s, but we have aces, kings, and queens, and they don't, right? So I think that their raise is pretty flush draw heavy in the first place, because it's hard for them to have strong hands that want to raise here. We're not talking about a bunch of hands. So when it gets back to me, what do I want to do? What's my choice? Well, we don't want to fold, right? We have king 8. We have a great hand. We're doing really well against flush draws. But I decided to go for a pretty interesting line. I actually bet 3-bet the flop. I raise here. And why am I going to do that? Well, I'm trying to put my head, I'm trying to put myself in my opponent's heads, right? What happens if they check raise the flop and they have 9s and 10s and jacks? They check raise and then I raise them back. What are they going to do? They're going to call. Right? They're going to call. They're really worried at that point that I have aces, that I have kings, that I have queens, that I have a set. They're not happy with their hand when they check raise and then they get raised back, and we're $800 deep. It's important to note here as well, I forgot to mention this. My opponent is wearing a Raise Your Edge hoodie, right? That's a training site that I used to work with a long time. So he's a thinking player. He's a studying player. Therefore, you know, he's able to hand read. So I decide to back raise, thinking that those thin value raises with the 9s, the 10s, the jacks, and the ace 8 is just going to call my back raise, right? When I make it 200 over this 80, they're just going to call, and we're going to go to a turn, and I can check. I can actually keep the pot smaller against those better hands. But then also against the draws, I'm getting money in now, ahead with my king 8, right? I'm forcing them to put in more money behind, and or potentially fold as well, which is fine with me too, in a 50-50. So I back raise.
We play in here. Okay, that's good enough.
And they got about 600 back to say.
200.
We make it 200. And my opponent goes all in. So you'll hear me talk about it in a second. Like I don't really know what hand this is. I'm pretty sure it's not 9s, 10s, jacks. And I'm extremely sure it's not ace 8. So it's either 2s, 3s, the one combo of 8s, or draws. They don't have any 2 pairs, right? They don't call 8 deuce. They don't call 8 3. They don't call 3 deuce in the big blind as a thinking player. So we're talking 3 combos of 3s, 3 combos of 2s, 1 combo of 8s. That's 7 combos, and the rest are draws. We have to call with our king 8. We actually kind of split their range to a spot where they're going to call with a lot of their good hands, and when they shove over the top, they're actually pretty weak. Just because of the range advantage, right? Just because we raise and they flat in the big blind, we created this scenario. So
I am wondering what I'm up against, to be honest. Yeah, okay, call.
It's not fun to get in 160 blinds with the top pair king kicker. But we did it, and we are correct. We are up against ace-9 of diamonds, which is basically flipping against us, right? There's a lot of dead money in the pot at some point. You know, like, yes, we're flipping against this hand in reality, but against this range, I think we've made a good play. We see a turn, 3 of spades, river jack of hearts, and we take down a very big pot. A super interesting pot where range dynamic really comes into play. Who can have what strong hands led to that pot being played very aggressively. And we take it down. I think I have the coolest piece of poker software you've ever seen today. It is called Hybrid Poker. Brand new piece of poker learning software where you test your score against myself, against Daniel Negreanu, against Bill Perkins, and see how you score against the 3 of us, as well as other poker players as well. But Hybrid Poker learns about you, the player, this is really cool. As Hybrid Poker gets to know you, it's going to tell you what to work on. There's a link to the IQ test down below. Try it for free. I think you'll like it. So try it out.
Raise, make it 30.
We get a raise to 30 under the gun in a straddle pot. We look down at king 9 of spades. Now we are very deep here. Just eyeballing my stack, we've got about 3,000 or so.
90.
Raise it up, make it 90 now.
We are going to 3-bet the king 9 suited. Now the button,
That's a call, 90.
playing pretty standard all day, but definitely likes to play a lot of pots, is going to flat call the 90 in position, and we get a call from the original raiser in c7. So 3 ways to the flop. King, jack, 9. Wow, this is very intense, right? We flop top and bottom pair, but immediately on this flop, I know, holy smokes, we are about 2,000 deep with seat 1. We're about 1,000 deep with seat 7. We flop top and bottom pair, but in a spot where both opponents could have straights, both opponents could have king jacks, both opponents could have sets of jacks as well, and flush draws. This is going to be a big pot.
175.
We bet 175. Just over half pot. We get a call from seat 1.
Raise.
And we get a raise from c7 to 360. 365. So we've got top and bottom raised to 365. And again, we are very deep here, right? Very deep. Our opponent in seat 7 probably has about 700 back. I can't see exactly. Seat 1 has about 2,000. I think it's a disaster nightmare if we go all in right now. We are only going to get called by queen 10, right? By king jack, by sets of jacks if we go all in for all of our money. We can't do that. We bet on the flop with a very strong hand, but now we have a middle strength hand against this raise. And we cannot play it for stacks. So we need to call. And that's what I do.
Call.
Call, 360.
Let's see the non-club turn. And we get a call on the button. Okay, so now I'm thinking probably not king jack from the button, right? Probably not queen 10 from the button. Much more likely to be flush draws, to be king queen, to be ace king, to be king 10, to be queen jack, to be jack 10, etc. So we go 3 ways to the turn. Our main concern is seat 7. Turn is the 8 of hearts. A brick. A great card. No one has 8s. It doesn't change the straights on the board. 10-7 is not a hand that people are going to have here. We love this card. It's a total brick. And it might even make a few 2 pairs. But we're feeling good with our king 9.
800.
We decide to bet 800 here into a very large pot on the safe card. Seat 1 actually tanks forever. Tanks for like 2 minutes, maybe not 2 minutes, 1 minute, and folds. And we're very deep against them. So when they fold, I don't mind. Seat 7 has about 650 left.
How many times?
Thinks for a very long time. Makes the call with ace king. And our king 9 is good.
Ace king chat.
We're going to run it 2 times, and we are playing for a massive pot. 10 is clean on the first grow.
The first one.
4 clubs is clean on the second one. We win a huge pot, and our stack grows to the largest stack I've had in this game since it started. On to the next hand, we have 6-5 offsuit. We get a limp on the button for 10, a call in the small blind, and we check in the big blind. Flop is queen 8-7. We flop an open ender without the spades, but I decide to go for a little bluff here in this small pot with our open ender. The button calls. And the small blind is going to call as well. Big blind was in there as well. They folded. Okay, on to the next hand. We have the king of diamonds. Does not complete our hand, but an interesting spot to continue bluffing again, I think. So I bet 110 with our open-ender without spades. And we get called by both opponents. What do they have? The beautiful, the gorgeous 4 of clubs on the river. We bet 260 with the absolute stone nuts. How good can you run? What an amazing session. We get an all-in from the button, who looks to have about that much left. And the small blind goes all in. And we call, because we got the nuts. The small blind actually has the nuts as well. It has 6-5 and the button.
I just had to double check. I didn't hesitate.
I don't know
sure.
what seat 6 had, but something sick. I mean, they're a good player. They just ran super cold. So we chop up their money. It's not a lot, but, you know, making the nuts on the river, pretty amazing stuff. What a session. By the end of this episode, we cashed out for $4,590 for a profit of $34.75, meaning the bankroll next episode is $10,305. We're in the profit after 7 episodes. Oh, what a grind to get back. It was crazy there for a long time. Definitely a cold start to the challenge. We're in the right direction. $305 profit. It feels good. I'm not going to lie. I was on cloud 9 after the session. Hope you all enjoyed this video. I think it's really interesting with some crazy hands, especially that King 8 hand was like a very interesting one, and the massive pot with King 9. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And that's it from me today. Until next episode, we'll see you later. Goodbye.